creditors were calling. I finally realized I needed help. The people at Janes & Noseworthy really took care of me, and I'm glad I chose a local solution. I felt like they understood me better. Getting help with my debt has given me the energy, the headspace, and the time to make my dreams come true. A chance to start again with knowledge, support, and people in your corner. Are you looking for that kind of help? It's okay.
Learn more about Leah's story at janesnoseworthy.ca.
Good evening. Welcome to Out of the Fog. Do not adjust your set. I am sitting on the opposite side of the couch tonight. Nurse June here to host Out of the Fog. 20 years this program has been delivering local content, and I am so excited to be invited as a guest host today. We have a great show in line. We have Charlene Brophy from Fonemed, the 811 nurse line. Super excited to have her along, as well as Lynn Power from the College of Registered Nurses of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we will be right back.
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
I just want to love people.
The devil's coming for me, Tammy.
Can we talk about Satan later, June?
Honey, you need to be able to stand up for what's important to you.
Get on the floor! Why did you help us?
You're watching Rogers TV St. John's.
And welcome back to Out of the Fog. Joining me on the couch for the first time as host is a mentor and entrepreneur extraordinaire, and of course registered nurse extraordinaire, Charlene Brophy from Fonemed.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, June, and congratulations. It's great to be here on the set for your inaugural hosting.
Thank you very much. It's quite exciting. When I thought what I wanted to talk about today, I knew that I was never going to veer very far off the Nurse June sort of mentality. And so on that note, we're going to challenge some norms and talk about differing how we're delivering healthcare. And so tell me about Fonemed and how you guys operate here in Newfoundland and around the world.
Sure. So Fonemed is an international telemedicine company. We've been here in Newfoundland now for almost 24 years and started our business here, providing remote virtual care services, and started very small, very humble beginnings with one small physician practice in Southern Oregon who needed some after-hours care, and grew over the last almost 24 years to provide services to about 25 million people throughout the U.S. and Canada. And all of our model is still virtual care to this day. So under that virtual care model, we provide remote nurse advice services to patients predominantly throughout the United States. So we've got nurses licensed in every state throughout the United States, and in relationship with a physician group with physicians licensed in every state throughout the U.S. So what we do is provide remote healthcare assessments of patients who are presenting with various different symptoms, be that a headache or a sore throat or a sinus infection or urinary tract symptoms, whatever the case may be. And we complete a triage assessment over the phone using clinical algorithms that we've built into our software platform to determine what's the most appropriate outcome of care. In other words, where does the patient need to go, or do they need to go anywhere, or how do we treat them at home? So some of the calls that we receive, for example, is from new mothers who have babies and they're running fever and so on, and they're not giving the right dose of Tavenor simply because they don't know what dose to give based on the child's weight and so on. So by being able to provide the right guidance on how to treat symptoms at home, we can keep patients at home and manage their care at home without ever bringing them out into an emergency room where we're exposing them to God knows what bugs, number one. And number two, the cost of the healthcare system in having those individuals there And then most importantly, taking up capacity in the emergency departments that must be kept for individuals who really need to be there. So we've carried that model through from our U.S. operation into Canada. And in 2009, we took over the provincial 811 health line.
Right.
And so now any individual in Newfoundland and Labrador, just by dialing 811 or by downloading the app from the, Google Play Store or the Apple Store, can access our services 24/7. Self-queue themselves for a callback or whatever the case may be. And the types of calls we receive on our Newfoundland provincial 811 line is exactly the same what we receive on our line in throughout the U.S. or throughout Venezuela or Haiti or wherever our patients are located. So it's providing that care for individuals to help them determine what type of care they need to access, whether they need to go see a doctor, whether they need to go to the emergency department, or whether they can manage the care at home.
So what types of numbers do you see with regards to how many patients you're keeping from having to go to the emergency department?
Right. So on that, when we begin our assessment of our call, we always say to our patients, before we talk about the reason for your call today, what would you have done if you had not been able to speak to our nurse tonight? And this is how we report on, the redirection of care. So on average, of those individuals who indicate they had planned to go to the emergency department, anywhere between 70 to 80% we keep away from the emergency department. Now, the sad reality is in Newfoundland, let's face it, with such limited options for accessing care, many of those patients still do go to the emergency department because there's no other option for them. And last year, in the midst of the pandemic, we introduced a solution to help some of these individuals to keep them at home by bringing on a group of nurse practitioners onto the 811 health line. So now if we receive calls to the health line that, for example, let's say it's a recurrent urinary tract infection, that we can, the nurse assesses they need to see somebody within the next 24 hours. They can't get into their primary care physician, or they don't have a primary care physician, because we all know what a problem that is in the province. Then we can escalate that call to a nurse practitioner who can complete an assessment over the phone and diagnose and treat the patient appropriately and so on. So it introduced another solution to help support a system that was struggling to keep up with the demand.
And that's a really great segue into what I want to talk about in the future. And that is, with all of the work that's been happening with Pat Parfrey and Sister Davis and the Health Accord, how do you feel virtual care, 811 particularly, is going to impact or be able to augment the services that they want to provide through these community care teams that they're proposing?
Right, and I've certainly had the opportunity to meet with the group, and on a couple of occasions, and each time I do, I'm more impressed than previous time before and so on, because I really feel that they're listening and the interest is there, and I believe that the province really sees that there's got to be a new way forward. We've got, with the aging demographic, we've got the oldest population in the entire country. The prevalence of chronic diseases and comorbidities, we simply can't manage at the current form. So I'm excited to see what comes out the other side of this. And what I'm really finding is they're open to new options for care. So I think we all recognize we need to move away from the bricks and mortar facility of providing care to patients and keep them away from those facilities in their own home when it's appropriate to keep them in their own home. So I find that, I could not have even imagined the adoption of telemedicine that happened overnight in the midst of this pandemic. Anybody that's heard me talk has heard me preach for years about the benefits of providing virtual care and the cost savings to the system and so on. But it was amazing what happened almost overnight. In Newfoundland in particular was really outstanding, because overnight we saw a 250% increase in demand for care.
Wow.
So within 10 days, for example, in Newfoundland alone, we had to hire 100 individuals just to manage the volume of calls. And only imagine that happening on the United States tenfold. So trying to manage the volume in both countries, and the big concern was there were so many people calling, the volume was so great. How do we make sure that everybody on that waiting to be answered is safe? And they're scared, they're symptomatic, or they've been exposed, and what does this mean for their families and so on? So just trying to keep up with the demand that came so suddenly. And lots of times when people hear me speak and they talk about, oh, it's too bad you're in Newfoundland, there's such limited access to opportunities to the global market and so on. And I always say it's been the polar opposite experience that I've had, because when this place started to fall apart then, we reached out to the community to see who else could help us. And for example, we couldn't find computers or monitors. We bought every single computer in the province because, you know, we had, not only did we hire 100 people in 10 days, I had almost 200 people I had to send working from home. So, you know, but we put out the call, and I can tell you within 4 hours, there was an Eastern School District truck backing into our parking lot filled with computers and monitors and so on. I had calls come in from you know, public health and from the nursing schools, instructors and so on to say, what can we do to help? Because their classes were displaced and so on. So the community came together like I've never seen before, and it was such a proud moment to be a Newfoundlander who was, you know, so accountable and responsible for helping respond to the demand. To have our community come together, it was one of those wow moments that I know I'll never forget.
Well, that's incredible, and I think that the strength of what you've been able to demonstrate over the course of the pandemic, to say nothing of the work you did previous to that with regards to the 911 attacks and that sort of thing, but how do you feel the general public is going to be receptive to increases in virtual care, less access to doctors? What do you think that transition is going to be like?
Well, I think there's going to, you know, it's going to be challenging. There's no doubt about it. But because of what the events that have unfolded over the last year and a half or 20 months now, I don't think it's going to be as challenging as we had feared it would be. And I can use my own mother, who's 88 years old, as an example, who would never get on the phone with a nurse practitioner before because, oh no, honey, I got to go see the doctor. You know, where all of a sudden she couldn't get in to see the doctor right away. So it was whoever I could talk to. And then after a couple of phone consultations with the nurse practitioner, I went, now I get what you do. You know, so I think the adoption is going to come because for individuals who want access to care and they see that, you know, the nurses and the nurse practitioners can be a support to our physician network in the province and be part of the, you know, be part of the overall response, I think the public is going to be much more open than we would have previously imagined.
What has been your proudest moment over the course of your career, and then specifically within the necessary growth in the last 20 months?
Yeah, you know, there's been a number of moments. You know, when you mentioned 9/11, and you know, when the second plane hit the, you know, the World Trade Center, we had a call come into our operation because one of our clients at that time was Beth Israel Medical Center, which is now Mount Sinai Medical System in New York City, and they're the largest tertiary care health system in the city. And called and said, we're sending all of our calls to you, because previously we only got the after-hours calls. We're sending all of our calls to you. Send nobody to the emergency room unless it's life or limb, basically. And I mean, the volume was at that moment in time overwhelming, as you can well imagine. We were still a very small company then, and everybody came together. It was an all hands on deck approach, and we managed the situation as best we could. And it was very emotional for the, you know, the individuals using our service as well as for our nurses, because there were calls coming in, you know, from wives of firefighters saying, I can't reach my husband, can you try? Because individuals couldn't get through to one another because the cell towers were down, but they could get through to Canada. So it was a lot of emotional type of calls that we were dealing with at the time. And, you know, the situation was unfolding, so we couldn't, you know, people were saying, well, do I leave the apartment? You know, we were saying, no, you need to stay in the apartment, turn off your lights, you know, turn off your air conditioning, put wet towels around the windows and doors, and just stay low, because we didn't know what was happening. Nobody knew what was happening. So that was a really proud moment, but I think there's nothing any prouder than how we responded, as I just referenced previously with the pandemic, and how everybody worked tonight, and not one person ever complained, or nobody said, you know, I'm just tired. Everybody did. It was like everyone was on such an adrenaline rush be able to respond and to help our province in the hour of need. You know, that's a moment I'll never forget.
Well, that is absolutely incredible. And to say that having you here as a first interview guest for me is an honor. It would be an absolute understatement and do no justice to how much you've been an inspiration to me over the course of my career, specifically in the last 5 years. So thank you very much, Charlene. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, just glad, you know, glad to be here, and it's great to see you starting this conversation, because I think it's a conversation that we need to get started now with all of our community partners, so we're prepared for what the new digital world of tomorrow and virtual care looks like in supporting the current system.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after these messages.
It all started when I racked up some serious debt. Interest payments were going up, creditors were calling. Janes and Noseworthy came up with a plan. Knowing that the phone was going to stop ringing and that I was not in this alone was a huge relief. Bankruptcy or a consumer proposal or whatever help you get is not the end. It's just the beginning. A chance to start again with knowledge and support and people in your corner. Are you ready? Get out of debt. It's okay.
Learn more about Leah's story at janesnoseworthy.ca.
And we're back. Welcome back. This is Nurse June here, stepping in for hosting duties, and we're carrying on with the conversation about how the Health Accord and the task force is going to help improve the healthcare delivery in Newfoundland and Labrador. And on that note, that takes nurses and nurse practitioners, and I have with us now Lynn Power, the Executive Director of the College of Registered Nurses of Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm very excited to have this conversation because as a registered nurse myself, who's gone into a private practice world, there's always that question of scope and regulations and accountability to the profession and to the public. Talk to me about the regulations and scope of practice and how the association, or the college, I should say, is the responsible body for that.
Yeah, and I'll start too that I am a registered nurse as well, so I appreciate and understand where you've been through and changed my career. I'm in my leadership role. I'm in a different than a non-traditional role. So it's a valid question, and I pick up on the fact the Association College, because we did change our name to a college just 2 years now, and so for those who have been practicing for a while, it is a little bit of difference. But I think it's important to understand what a regulator is, and so we are the regulator for registered nurses and nurse practitioners, but there's 17 other healthcare regulators in this province.
Wow.
So the important role that a regulator plays, sort of, I guess the easiest way for the public probably to understand is sort of setting the rules, sort of putting order, you know, identifying the checks and balances that are necessary to basically get safe, competent practitioners in your field. So big part of our role at the college is, it starts right from the beginning, identifying what the competencies should be learned in the educational programs, approval of the schools of nursing, being sensitive to trends about what might be out there and adding things like virtual nursing. That kind of a way. So that's the start, doing the initial licensure. What are the requirements for licensure? Then setting standards for practice, like what's the expected code of ethics, what's expected of registered nurse and nurse practitioners as they interact in their practice. Not clinical details like would be in an employment setting, but the broader sweeping principles of expectations, and then back to your main question around scope. So what is it that an RN or an NP does? So it is our legislative authority to help define that. But it's not defined by a list. You won't be able to turn a page and see a list of drugs or anything like that, because that's actually prohibitive for advancement. Right. There's different phases of development of the scope of different practitioners over different times. So once upon a time there was lists.
Right.
But really, so the scope is really what are nurses, what are registered nurse practitioners educated, so what's in their core educational program I mentioned, what's in their continuing educational program, their specialty educational program if they work in a unique area, and then what's in their practice setting. What kind of policies or guidelines or approaches, what type of clients do they see, so you contextualize it. So scope is kind of defined, what do you know, and what can you safely do?
And that's a really great way to lead into the conversation around scope of practice and what we're really allowing registered nurses and nurse practitioners to do in the current climate of healthcare in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the Health Accord has come out with some preliminary models around community care teams. And instrumental in that is the nurse practitioner and the registered nurse roles. How do you see that becoming a better stretch of what the profession has been and where it's going to go?
Well, I think teams is where everything needs to go in any type of service industry.
Absolutely.
Because many minds make not just lighter work, what the old slogan was, but many minds make a better quality, safer, comprehensive role. And no one practitioner has all the knowledge, whether it's in healthcare or any other field, to do it, and no one has the ability to do it from a workload perspective. So I think the biggest thing that's coming out of this is just an elaboration, a crystallization of community care and in the team approach. There's always been teams in hospitals, there's always been teams in specialty areas, but how do we have it in a community care in a more structured, integrated way, so it's not in silos where you might have community care nurses, or you might have family practice physicians, or you might have dietitians in a private practice, you might have other private practitioners in different areas providing services. How do we all link? How do we all work together so that we get the best for everybody out there?
What do you think will be the biggest challenge on a go-forward basis with the Health Accord and the community care teams, and educating the public on what the nurse practitioner does and the registered nurse does, and that just because you've been assigned to a physician doesn't mean you're going to have less care? What do you think is the approach there?
Well, I think that's a very pivotal question. So I think it's important that that it's asked and spoke to, so the public have some time to just think through. So I think the commentary that I've heard, because I'm involved with the Health Accord work, is that once you see a member of the team, you see the team. So if it is happened to be the registered nurse or nurse practitioner you see, be assured that the communication, the documentation, the planning, the consultation, that is occurring. You might not see it on the interface, but that's the promise, that's the commitment, and that's the value of these teams. So I think the public have to get used to that, that you're going to see the right person in the right place at the right time for what your needs are, and that may change over time. But yet there will be continuity. There has to be, some person that you probably follow with, or member of the team you follow more with, depending on the chronicity of what your situation is.
Yeah. Back to COVID a little bit, just chronologically, if I could move backwards a little bit. What did you hear from the members of the college as the biggest concerns, barriers, hurdles that they had to overcome during the height of the pandemic, and now as it becomes more of an endemic situation?
I mean, you can use slogans and stuff like that, but nurses answer the call is kind of what's been said in many places. So it's a part of the the role, providing that service in challenging times. So I think in the beginning there was that added strain and stress and fear. What could you bring home or not bring home, or where could it go? I've practiced throughout a couple of maybe they weren't pandemic level, but major milestones in infectious diseases,
right.
and that fear is always there. So I think the first part was a quick learning curve, a steep learning curve, and not a basic infectious disease processes, wash your hands kind of in between, but what are the different protective devices you needed, right. What were the things to do. So there was a learning curve, there was a fear, there was that, but I'm here. Mm-hmm. And then I think going off, there's right now it's there should be pride that it's been a long job done. There is a bit of fatigue you'll hear, and there's no doubt about the strain on it. But I think the pride is probably the biggest part, that we've been there, we've contributed, and we've stepped up.
That's wonderful. How receptive have you found the rest of the members of your team to ideas that you might have about where regulatory's role is with the registered nurses or nurse practitioners with the go forward on the Health Accord plan?
Well, I think that, regulation is one of those behind the scenes sort of pieces. People, we know you got a license. There's somebody out there you get your license to, but do you put that much time and energy and thought into what? The thinking and the checks and balances and the processes that go behind it. So I think it's been an opportunity, just if I link the two together with COVID. People never realized Health Canada as a regulator until now, and approval of the drugs. Exactly. So I think there's an opportunity there when we talk about the Health Accord, when we talk about scope and the important role that the regulatory bodies look at with scope, thinking of the public, because the purpose of a regulatory body is to protect the public, to put those checks and balances in place so the public can be assured that they get safe, competent care. Doesn't matter if they're in the tip of Labrador or down in Port aux Basques.
Right. I'm going to ask you the same question I just asked Charlene Brophy. What has been your proudest moment as the leader of the college, or as a registered nurse, or as a resident of Newfoundland and Labrador over the course of this pandemic? What's been the most inspiring pride moment for you?
You know, that's a challenging question in the sense that I'm a grandmother with 5 grandkids, and I've had 2 babies born in the pandemic. So one that, you know, you're not allowed to get in with and not. So I'll say that just quickly, that I love my grandchildren, I love my kids and that there. I mean, I'm 20 years at the college. So there's a lot in my career. I'm 36, 7, 8, almost 40 years, I guess. I had to lose track of time in my profession. Wow. So I think being, you know, nurse practitioners came in 1998. That was a big piece. Changing to the college came in 2019. You know, joining in things exciting like this with the Health Accord. Like, there's many, many milestones, but you always remember the times you touched a client yourself, or you had an engagement with somebody along the lines, and there are way too many to touch on, but it's been a wonderful career. I love it, and I really value working at the college and being able to lead with a fabulous staff team and volunteers that contribute forward on how do we put those checks and balances in place so that the public do get the safe care they need from registered nurses, nurse practitioners.
That's wonderful. Well, Lynn Power from the College of Registered Nurses of Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a wonderful conversation to have. I think the time is now to have these hard conversations, but also to educate about what it is we're trying to do as a profession, and then also as people that want to see the province get the best health care that we can. And as on a personal note, I am in love with your shoes. And you tell me they're like 20-year-old shoes, these things? That's incredible. I'm such a shoe person myself. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for joining us today. Is there anything that you'd like to share before you go?
No, thank you. And I wish you well if you continue on hosting. And it's a privilege to be able to raise, you know, messaging about what nursing can do, you know, as a part of a team. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. And we will be back shortly. Thank you very much.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
Welcome back. What a show. I had so much fun. Thank you to Rogers TV and Out of the Fog for inviting me here today. It was so important to have such important conversations as we move forward with the Health Accord, as they start to really develop the plan that we're going to implement for this province. How do we have those conversations? Anybody with any questions, I definitely encourage you to follow up with the Health Accord NL online. Nurse June signing out. Can't wait to come back again. Thank you so much, and have a great night.
If you have a